AMD, don't fuck this up.
There's a lot more to be said. There's a lot of nuance to the situation based off of AMD's own goals, but we see here that so many people are at least positive, very excited about these, even many saying that these are going to save PC gaming. Now, what could go great for AMD this launch is Nvidia's stock has been very, very low and their GPUs have been extremely expensive, but I have evidence for you that AMD is supposed to have really strong supply. Huge W here. At the moment, AMD is at almost the lowest market share that they've ever been. That's why this came out. So this is Jack Hune. This is AMD's Senior Vice President of General Manager of Computing and Graphics Business Group. But this is an interview that came in September of 2024, and he himself said this. So my priority right now is to build scale, to get us to 40 to 50% of the market faster. Do I want to go after 10% of the total addressable market or 80%? I'm more of an 80% kind of guy because I don't want AMD to be a company that only people who afford Porsches and Ferraris can buy. We want to build gaming systems for millions of users. And then he goes down here to also say, but my priority right now is to build scale for AMD because without scale right now, I can't get developers. AMD is going after market scale, or market share. And here are the fruits of their labor, the 9070 and the 9070 XT. Now, I think these cards are priced pretty aggressively, especially for the time right now. We're gonna have to see how these are gonna shape up into the future because this might be temporary. Now, the big red flag in the room here is the 9070. AMD has not learned from their lessons. This launch, I would be surprised if this goes really any differently than every other AMD launch. And I'm getting kind of sick of this. AMD is cannibalizing their own market. I don't understand why this happens. And this 9070, because it's priced so closely and has specs like this, it's going to be problematic. Them only being $50 apart is just way too close. And the 9070 is not going to ever look like it's good value compared to the 9070 XT. And I would expect either the XT is going to go up in price or the 9070 base model is going to end up coming down in price. If they're going to price their cards how it is, it should have been $500. That's how you'd have to build market share. You have to convince people that were already on NVIDIA to get to AMD. Okay, so they shared these performance numbers. We see the raster performance and the ray tracing performance. This is the 9070 versus the 7900 GRE. I went ahead and calculated the average of the rasterized performance and the ray tracing performance on these GPUs. And this is at 1440p. You can just kind of get an idea of this. I'll hide my camera if you want to take a screenshot or something like that. That's the average from the 9070 at 1440p. And then this is at 4K versus the 7900 GRE. The 7900 GRE is a $550 graphics card that AMD released last generation. There's also the 9070 XT versus the GRE. You can see a pretty big uplift in terms of rasterized performance, but it does cost $50 more. And it's 48% faster in ray tracing here. Go to 4K, it's 38% faster in rasterized and then 52% faster in ray tracing. And the last thing they compared it to is the 5070 Ti. Now, this was kind of bold of them because this card just came out. Now, we know NVIDIA pricing and everything, it's really hard to find a 5070 Ti for MSRP. It's for $750. Generally, they've been going for about $900 right now, but that could easily change if NVIDIA wants to, strike up some more production. That's why AMD should be worried about this, but it should be performed on average the same in rasterization. And then it's apparently they're saying 7% slower in ray tracing, but I think it will be worse than this, and their numbers are a little bit swayed towards the AMD card. Now I have these charts. Now I showed you guys in a recent video about all of these stacked up and how the cards are, but now we have the official numbers, not just the leaked numbers. It ends up being very close to what the leaked numbers were. Where did I get this data? This is from Hardware Unboxed. All the links will be in the description. And if you notice on these charts, the 7900 GRE is not in this list of GPUs that they tested. So what I did is I got the 7900 GRE and I compared it to the 7800 XT in this other video that they have. Now these are different games, but I think these are going to be pretty close in terms of performance. But let's dig into this because I also went ahead here and put on the 5070 into this chart because we can base a little bit of performance off of that too, because NVIDIA has revealed numbers. Here's their official results here. These are the rasterized tests or closest to the rasterized tests that I think I could get for the RTX 5070, and this is against RTX 4070. I would think it would perform close to a 4070 Super, maybe even nearing a 4070 Ti in terms of its performance. I just went and zoomed out. You can see all this data. This is at 1440p. In terms of the performance, the 9070 seems like it's going to be about on par of its rasterized performance and not ray tracing. It'll be on about the same level as the 7900 XT, which was a very fast GPU. But the thing is, the 7900 XT later in its life was going for $700 very consistently. That's when I bought mine. I bought that in 2024 in like January, and it really didn't change that much throughout the rest of the year. So that basically means on the 9070, it could in rasterized performance be basically a $150 discount, which isn't bad. We'll dig into it in the price to performance in just a little bit, but I'm not sure if this is exactly enough because a lot of people still weren't choosing to buy the 7900 XT at the time because the 4070 Ti Super was still presenting pretty nice value at $800, and it was very close in terms of rasterization. There's also the 9070 XT here at $600. You know, you see the gap, and it really just dawns on you as like, why the would you buy the cheaper one? It doesn't really make sense when it is so much faster. I mean, I'll put the percentage on screen. I don't know why this exists. Why did AMD make this misstep again? I don't know what their margins are on their products. 77 FPS at 4K is pretty nice. It'd be matching the 5070 Ti, but I'm not sure if it's enough if NVIDIA actually sells their cards at MSRP, because you're gonna get things like better ray tracing performance, and you're gonna get things like DLSS and, you know, better reputation, because that's what we've seen from NVIDIA. They keep innovating, whereas AMD is always a follower, it seems like. And then the 9070 at this point is getting to this range where, I mean, it's okay at 4K. It has less VRAM than the 7900 XT, and it would be about on par with a 4070 Ti. It's only like 10% faster or so than the 5070 at the same price, and it would have 16 gigs of VRAM. This card doesn't really make any sense based off the predicted performance of what the 5070 would be. And at that point, I don't know if people would take the upsell that would be getting the 9070 XT. Again, this all is like if the 5070 is going to be at MSRP. I do have some information on kind of supply we'll be looking at. Let's hop over to ray tracing. Again, the 5070 should sit here around the 4070 Super, and the 4070 Ti should be in between these here. And the 7900 GRE that AMD compares it to is like way down here at 39 FPS. It is kind of garbage. You never really use ray tracing on this. And this has been a big thing with AMD cards, is you really do have to make that compromise because you're really missing out on a ton of gaming performance, especially forward-looking gaming performance. But we are seeing a pretty large ray tracing increase going up to the 9070. But if you think about it, the 5070 is going to be at like 70 FPS or so. So AMD did show their 9070 XT against the 5070 Ti. And then they also showed it against the 7900 GRE. And what I found is on the different data, and if we just look here, you get very different results. The 9070 XT is 7% slower than the 5070 Ti here, where it's 58 FPS against the GRE. It's faster on the 5070 Ti. But the difference, I think this would probably be at like 60 FPS or so, which would be behind the 5070 in terms of ray tracing, which isn't really a good look when you cost more. And the reason this is happening is Hardware Unboxed and obviously AMD, they test different ray tracing titles. What's weird about ray tracing titles is they have different levels of integration for ray tracing. So some games might be a lot heavier than other ones. And when you look at the specific results that AMD did, this is against the 5070 Ti, you can see it's Cyberpunk here. And in Cyberpunk, that can be a very heavy ray tracing game, but it could also be a very light ray tracing game depending on how you configure it. And I'm assuming, because these are ultra ray tracing benchmarks, that I'm assuming this is ray tracing ultra on Cyberpunk. And you can see it's slowest in that title. 9070 XT is leveraging more of its ray tracing performance against the 5070 Ti. Then it doesn't really perform as well in terms of ray tracing. At least that's what I'm seeing here. Same thing with Star Wars Outlaws. I'm pretty sure this is a pretty heavy ray tracing game. Witcher 3, I don't think has huge levels of ray tracing in it. F1 2024, I think is around like a medium level of ray tracing. Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, ultra settings is very intensive in ray tracing, but I'm not sure. Hitman 3 is relatively light. Watch Dogs Legion is relatively light. Marvel Spider-Man 2, relatively light. It could be crazy on the higher settings. That's what we don't know. Far Cry 6, I think, is pretty light on ray tracing. I don't know all these for sure. What I do know is I'll hop over to the Hardware Unboxed video that this was tested in, wrong one. If you look across these games, he tested this in very, very intensive ray tracing titles like Metro Exodus. This one is very intensive. Alan Wake 2, very intensive. Cyberpunk, Marvel Spider-Man Remastered. This one is medium levels of intensity, and it's similar to Spider-Man 2. Dying Light 2, Also pretty heavy on RT, and Black Myth Wukong is crazy on ray tracing. And I would think the actual performance of the 9070 XT and probably the 9070 as well are more somewhere in the middle here because they're testing different games. This will all change when actual reviews come out. We'll actually see what happens. But I think the NVIDIA cards are still going to be quite a bit ahead. Even the 5070 should be up here with the 4070 Super or so. Now, the next thing we can look at is the cost per frame. We can break down this performance and then relate it to how much it actually costs for the card. Now, up here, this is the MSRP. So this is what the cards costed at launch or should have costed at launch. So give us an idea of how people would have received these at the beginning versus how they receive them now. Now, this is based on rasterized performance, not ray tracing. The 5070 might actually be a little bit higher up here if it was based on ray tracing as well. But the 5070 does have a VRAM problem because it only has 12 gigabytes versus the 16 gigabytes on the AMD cards. And despite the 9070, this is AMD's mistake, being cheaper than the 9070 XT, it offers worse cost per frame. So every bit of performance you're paying for is worse on that graphics card, and it makes no sense compared to AMD's own GPUs. I don't know, how did they not learn from other lessons? Like, are they in Looney Land? Like, are they on crazy pills? I don't understand what they're doing over there. Now, the 5070 is 16% worse cost per frame versus other cards. Again, this is estimated performance and cost and everything. Depends if the 5070 will be going for MSRP or not. And I also went ahead here and you can see on the left side, I calculated all the percentages versus the MSRPs of the other cards. The 5070 Ti as well has 22% worse cost per frame, which is pretty close to what AMD advertises. Said that the 9070 XT is like 23% better cost per frame than the 5070 Ti. I don't know if this will be enough to convince people, but it's kind of the same thing again. But I think what's more important is the idea going into this new generation, how much did they cost? And we can see the actual price market here. So again, this is from Hardware Unbox's data. Different cards ended up getting much cheaper later into their life. Even the 7800 XT, which was a great value GPU from AMD, dropped to 470, or I saw it even as low as 450 and 430 $, I think I saw it that low. 4070 Super dropped down to 585 at one point. That one's 25% worse cost per frame. The 7900 XT at $690, even though that was a good value GPU, it had worse cost per frame than this new card, 28% worse. I haven't heard it from Hardware Unbox. They talked about AMD cards only really started to go off of shelves once they hit 30% better price to performance.
I've been given sales data that when Radeon GPUs did offer 30% better value, they sold. I don't know if saying outsold GeForce was right, but they sold. Like, they were moving serious inventory.
And that's not what these new cards are launching at. Even against the 5070 Ti, it's 22%, and that's for the best one. If you actually relate these on their ray tracing performance cost per frame, the 5070 Ti would probably be better than the 9070 XT. Again, this is assuming that the NVIDIA cards would be at their MSRP. And I wouldn't be surprised if NVIDIA feels threatened if they start to ramp up production and actually get, if it is a supply issue or if this is some kind of manufacturer thing. I'm not 100% sure on this. Putting more cards out, whatever they end up doing. And then all of a sudden, all the NVIDIA cards are going for MSRP, and then nobody's going to end up buying the AMD cards. And then I wouldn't be surprised in like 6 months or so if the 9070 XT was now going for $550. I wouldn't be surprised if they discount these like crazy, which isn't anything different than AMD's been doing every generation up to this point. Now, some exclusive information here. I went ahead and asked, so this is an AMD rep that I talked to, and they said that as for supply, we expect to have strong availability at launch. Now, this doesn't exactly tell us how many they're going to have, but strong availability does sound confident. Now, something else I want to show you is I reached out to Micro Center, just in customer service, not anything crazy, wondering with the upcoming RX 9000 series launch, what kind of supplies do you think you guys will be looking at? The customer service guy over at Micro Center said no problem at all. It seems that we do not have a lot of details about the supply for the launch at the moment. We do have the release date, but not much else just yet. Then he also gave me a little follow-up, which I said, oh, okay, that sounds good. I'll check the site and everything. And to that he said, absolutely. I'm feeling optimistic that AMD will have more availability than NVIDIA, but we'll just have to wait and see. Obviously, isn't going to give me like actual numbers, but I wanted to get a vibe check, basically. They're saying they should have good availability, and AMD's rep is also saying the same thing. It doesn't seem like it's going to be bullshit. And the reason I think this is the case is because AMD delayed this launch from like mid-January all the way until March. And that gave them a lot of time to build up supply and actually send things to these stores, and they should be good and available at launch. This doesn't mean they're going to be at MSRP, mind you. I'm a little worried though, because AMD seems extremely disorganized. So what I don't show you in this email that got sent to me from AMD is this chunk up here. I was talking to them about samples way back at the beginning of February and everything, and I thought we're on the same page with this. But all of a sudden, they tell me in an email, hey, you weren't on the media list, and we sent out samples a while ago. I don't know what's going on at AMD. They never even told me that I wasn't going to be getting one. I even asked them when the cards would be coming out because I hadn't really heard anything about it yet. And I wanted to start testing stuff so I could compare it against. So I started testing stuff. The launch was coming around and they didn't send a sample. And I was like, hey, is there a sample coming? They're like, no. We didn't bother to tell you that you didn't get a sample until just now. I don't even know what to say to that. Like, that's just so disorganized. I don't require a sample. I can buy the graphics card. It just saves me some money and saves me some time. But that's crazy. But something I also found out too is the RTX 5070. They ran out of samples to ship to reviewers. I still don't have one. Supposed to get one for a while, and they're just getting another shipment, which means that Nvidia is actually struggling with stock for whatever reason. I don't know. They still haven't just outright told me why they're having stock issues. You'd think they could just dismiss this, but we'll see what Nvidia does, and we'll also see what AMD does, because AMD doesn't even have reference models of these cards, which means they might not be at MSRP. Let's go ahead and move on from this, because what I find really encouraging about this generation of GPUs, AMD is making some strides in the software department that makes getting their GPUs like less of a compromise. First thing is with upscaling. I'm really excited to test this. Shame I'm not getting a sample because I wanted to test this like soon. But FSR4, we all know how important upscaling is in games at the moment. It's using machine learning, only gonna be available on the RDNA 4 GPUs. I don't know if there'll be backwards compatibility. We all know that FSR has been very far behind in terms of DLSS and everything. So 30 plus games at launch on FSR 4 and 75 plus coming in 2025 throughout the year, which is pretty cool. We'll see it in games like Black Ops 6, Warzone, God of War, Horizon, Last of Us Part 1, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Marvel Rivals. But the reason it's launching in so many games at the beginning is because it's utilizing a very similar system as what Nvidia is doing with their new app that overrides DLSS in the game. So as long as this game has FSR 3.1 in it. Now, does FSR 4 compete with DLSS? That part we don't really know yet. AMD showed some garbage visual comparisons in their slides. Like, it's barely noticeable what it is, and they showed them at like 1080p and stuff. The best comparisons we have right now are still what Hardware Unboxed and Digital Foundry got when they're at CES, when there was a preview of FSR 4 there. In those tests, like, it was a big improvement on FSR 3.1, which is good. And maybe it'll be less of a compromise to get an AMD GPU as long as the games you play actually have FSR 4 in them. But we don't know how close it is to DLSS, and especially DLSS 4, because we've seen that that one makes some pretty big image quality improvements. Now, something actually concerns me about the new upscaler is the performance. Now, something you guys might know is that upscalers do have a performance hit. So AMD did show this slide. Now, this is only a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 game test here. But in these games, the upscaler is the white one and the native resolution is the gray one here. You got 77%, 42%, 33%, 44%, 55, 200, or 100% faster, 98% faster. These were all at performance mode upscaling at 4K. But on average here, it's only giving us 65% performance uplift on the AMD GPU. Not amazing, especially when you compare it to DLSS 4. So I did a test recently, these tests on different series of GPUs, and tested it throughout 3 games. It wasn't a huge suite of games. So seeing something like this, and it's 15% faster on DLSS 4, while also DLSS 4 probably is gonna have superior image quality over FSR 4 as well. And it really does show that I think Nvidia is still going to be ahead in terms of upscaling. And that doesn't even consider the older version of DLSS 4 is DLSS 3, obviously, if you can count. and that one performed even better. It'll be close enough that I don't think people will compromise as much on it, but I will give them a little bit of benefit here. As long as they keep developing this, they can probably improve the efficiency, just like how NVIDIA did with DLSS over time as well. It ran better and it got you more performance, but that is to be seen, and I won't be able to test it. So you're gonna have to check a lot of other people. Hopefully I can get a graphics card pretty soon to launch. And now another thing we obviously saw in a lot of these tests, AMD did a pretty significant improvement ray tracing performance, 52% versus 38% on raster. That they have some really nice ray tracing architectural improvements. Now I don't really want to go into the whole nerd shit on this, but basically they made ray tracing more efficient. Then they also have brought up that the new GPUs have this great AI performance. I'm not an AI guy. Tell me what this means. I don't know, but apparently it's like 2 times faster, 4 times faster, 4 times, 8 times, and they got new FP8 formats. Here's the actual performance that this relates to. But another big thing that AMD has struggled on with their GPUs is the encoding performance for video. This is one of the reasons why I personally use an NVIDIA GPU on my main system. NVIDIA encoding for video is just more efficient. I want to get the best efficiency when I'm recording videos, so I don't take up a bunch of storage space and all that. And AMD apparently is starting to improve some of this stuff. They did boast some improvements on every single one of their codecs, but they especially said they're fixing their H.264 encoder by quite a bit, which is what you have to use to stream on Twitch. And it should help it not look like this pixelated blob and instead look more like this, which is a lot more clear. Still not perfect, but a lot more clear. This would be something I'd like to test as well, because less downsides of getting AMD is a good thing. They also boasted this ray tracing, actually path tracing demo, which I thought looked like absolute shit. You know, despite the terrible bit rate that was on the video of their presentation, that looked awful. But something that was very cool about the path tracing demo, AMD doesn't have ray reconstruction. This is an AI denoiser that NVIDIA uses for their stuff. And what they did boast in their thing is over here, this is the base path tracing, and then there's this neural denoiser. And what I would think that this is actually ray reconstruction that AMD is at least working on internally. But overall, we're seeing a lot of this stuff, the GPUs. I just really wanted to clear the air about this because they're good. These are a good product. They're just not what everybody's making it out to be. I really wanted to drive that home. What it doesn't do is convince people that are already buying NVIDIA, have been trusting NVIDIA for a while, to actually make the leap to go to AMD. AMD also made the major misstep of pricing their own GPUs so close to each other. I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. How do they manage to do that? But something that does give me hope is the availability. We'll see how this does stack up. And if they are available to a large degree, then NVIDIA will probably up their production as well. And what I think is, especially with the prices and stuff, if NVIDIA actually sells their cards at MSRP, I don't think people will buy the AMD ones. And AMD will end up discounting them like they always do. I think most people will just be buying AMD cards right now because they might be the only graphics cards that are available. Let me know what you think in the comments. I think it's going to be pretty competitive. That's been it for me though. All right, peace.